Hey guys, welcome back to the Spectre Creative Channel. I'm a Lego representation of Scott Neitlich, and I get help a lot of times on this channel with suggestions and information and even images by a lot of the subscribers. And Roye, who has sent a lot of images of He-Man product, recently had a suggestion for a topic. So huge thanks to Roye from South Africa for helping me out on this one. And the question that he asked all the way across the sea is, what about rabbit hole collecting? And at first I said, well, yeah, okay. I mean, I do like rabbits, and I'm a big fan of Lewis Carroll, especially his philosophy about carrying mail in your car before you go out the door. Check it out, Google it. But no, what he talks about rabbit hole collecting is the idea that once you start down the action figure path, forever will it dominate your destiny. Is there ever an ending point? Is it a forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever thing, as Dr. Cox might say? Well, there are some toy lines that are very finite, mostly because they only have one or two waves because the content that they're supporting doesn't perform to expectations. So in the early 90s, we had a ton of toy lines like this. So this one, if you're a Michael Crichton fan or Jurassic Park fan, you may have also seen Congo. And yes, there was like one wave of regular figures, then I think a wave of deluxe figures. So if you are a fan of the Congo toy line and movie, it's easy to say you own them all. They're not going to keep coming out with Congo action figures until we're all blue in the face, or red in the face, or green in the torso. I don't know. It was a weird movie, but Michael Crichton was all over the map back then after Jurassic Park did so well. Maybe they'll finally make a good movie out of the Andromeda strain. I mean, not the one from the 70s. Okay, totally off topic. Let's circle back around. So the idea is, yes, you can have a complete collection of a toy line, and this can be everything from obscure lines in the 90s to the granddaddy of them all, the Kenner Star Wars line, because they're over. There's a definitive number of figures. Sometimes they even creatively number them for you on the back of the package. Ain't that nice of them? So whether you count all 92, 96, or 120, you can have them all. And the big reason is, yes, this is a very addicting hobby because, again, when you get one, the idea of having more than one is just more than that. And it's enjoyable. I mean, we obviously wouldn't be collecting toys if we didn't like it, despite the addictive properties. But believe me, there's a lot worse things you can be addicted to. Just look at the direction of breakfast cereals lately. All right. So some toy lines, though, are not finite. Some toy lines just go on forever. Perfect example is Hot Wheels. Hot Wheels has been going strong since the 1960s, and despite the fact they can no longer be purchased for 99 cents, they are showing no stoppage, no sign of stopping. See, when you get the language, the order of the words correctly, they actually make sense. Now, one of the problems with Hot Wheels collecting is the generation that collects Hot Wheels tends to be aging out, meaning they're not being replaced by younger fans. So maybe there will be a day, but the thing is, Hot Wheels playing with kids, that's probably not going to go away. So who knows what's going to happen with the more high-end collectible aspects of Hot Wheels. But as far as it being on shelf for kids, and that's how most collector product gets to shelf, it piggybacks on the kid product. Now, one of the lines, and I was talking about this earlier with Star Wars, that kind of feels like it's going forever and ever, is the modern Hasbro line that started in '95 with Power of the Force 2. There have been literally over 1,000 figures released just from the classic trilogy alone, not even counting all of those additional pieces of content like Solo, a Solo story, or the Ewoks Caravan of Courage. Yeah, I think they had like one toy. Well, this line used to be, as I said, very much a kid line about figures and vehicles, but now that the vehicles cost over $100 to sell because of the inflated prices and the rising cost of labor in Asia, well, that's just how it is. They've sort of priced themselves out of the market to really be much more of a collector line where those of us who have been getting it from the beginning just can't stop. And that's part of the whole rabbit hole issue that Roye brought up in his email to me. So, even though Star Wars 3 3/4 traditionally is kind of pricing itself out of the market, there are plenty of toy lines taking advantage of the play pattern that this started, that being figures go inside of ships and kids play around with them. While the Mission series or Mission Fleet, whatever they're calling it these days, yeah, Mission Fleet, that's what it is, it may not be as popular with collectors. Of course, it's not where the money is. It's with kids and gift givers and moms and dads and, people who get toys for getting an A+ on their paper. That same thing goes for the new Jazzwares Squadron series, or Micro Galaxy Squadron. That's right, that's what they're calling this one, which basically emulates the same play pattern as the Action Fleet line from Galoob from years ago. All right, I'm a little off track. Back to the point. The idea that there are sort of three different ways of collecting toy lines for us as adult collectors, right? So we've talked earlier about the finite toy line that has a specific endpoint where you can literally collect them all, just like it says on the back of the packaging. So again, like that Congo example, or one that I actively collect is Robin Hood Prince of Thieves, there's only a set amount of toys out there. They're never going to make more, despite the fact that I really tried. Now, the other type of collecting is sort of the personal limitation. So, as opposed to collecting them all and having a set stopping point, well, the stopping point is based on your own interest. For me, I like to collect Marvel Legends, but specifically X-Men Marvel Legends from the early 90s. Call it the Jim Lee era, the animated series era, whatever you want. This was a time when I wasn't getting toys, and I'm one feral action figure away from finally being able to complete this set. It's a limitation I've created for myself. No one has told me which figures to get or which ones not to. I personally chose that I wanted to complete these 90s teams. On the other hand, the other area I collect in Marvel Legends is Spider-Man and his villains. Now, I only collect classic Spider-Man villains. Tends to be, again, 90s backwards, when I was really started reading comics in the early 90s. I'm not that into modern Spider-Man villains, so as new foes are added to his rogues gallery, they really don't make their way into my collection the way characters do if they had been around since the 1960s and 70s. So, as an example, this character recently released was one that I passed on, yet I got another character in the same wave, Shriek, because she was from the 90s. Now, recently, there's an Amazon pack that was revealed for Spider-Man that has 4 villains and a Spider-Man repaint. Some of these characters, I'll admit, I'd never heard of Human Fly before he was announced as an action figure. This was like way before my time, and he had limited, I guess, panel time. So even though I hadn't really heard of him before, he totally fits into my sort of limited or my self-created guidelines of what I collect, which is classic Spider-Man villains. So while I may not yet have a spot to go into my collection, minus the one that Juan Soto made for me, I will likely be adding Human Fly, and I continue to get more Spider-Man villains and Spider-Man supporting cast characters as they come out. But if they're purely from the modern era, not so much. So what I would call this type of collecting is more elastic. So there's not a finite number to complete them all, but we've created in our minds what our guidelines are. And again, in this case for me, it's Spider-Man villains call it the year 2000. All right, now what about the one that's non-stop? What about the toy lines that you have to be committed to in order to have a full collection, and there's really no goalposts involved? And for this, I talked about Hot Wheels earlier, but in the action figure world, the modern Star Wars line, despite losing vehicles at retail due to price points, is one that's been continuing non-stop for, like 30, 35 years now. We've had modern Star Wars figures, and I do collect them all, at least as far as classic trilogy. Yeah, a few characters like Mandalorian pop up now and then that I pick up who aren't from the classic trilogy, but every figure I've got is cataloged, shelved, and drawered there. So I do display a lot of them around my office where I have room. I have a special affinity for things like Rebel pilots and the Cantina aliens and Jabba's palace, droids, that kind of thing. One day I'll have room to display, all 1,000 plus of my figures. I just physically don't have the space right now. I have to prioritize so that everything gets a little bit of love. But there's no stopping. There's no sign of this line stopping, again, despite the fact that it's no longer the premier sort of day-in, day-out line for Hasbro. That's become the Mission Fleet series because of the scale allowing for vehicles. 3 3/4 vehicles, as I noted earlier, are now over $100, and that just is not a price point that can make this the bread and butter day in and day out. Now, there is sort of a stopping point with my Star Wars collection that I'm trying to get all the original 92 or 120, however you want to count them, and right now we're basically looking at just a small handful of figures that have never had a remake in the modern line, and specifically we're looking at Sima Lu, the Imperial Dignitary, who has still not gotten made. But when he does get made, and I'm saying when because I have a lot of faith, Does that mean I'm going to stop collecting Star Wars action figures? Well, Hasbro certainly thought that a while back. They deliberately didn't remake this figure because they felt that if they had completed the original line, they would lose a lot of collectors who would suddenly see this as a stopping point and no longer collect. And while I'm sure there are some who feel this way, for me, even when a figure is redone over and over again, from the original trilogy, I'm getting it, and I'm logging the improvements. It's a never-ending Matrix-esque rabbit hole that I've jumped in starting in '95, and the reasons for doing it is obviously because it brings us joy. It's not like I'm crazy or something, right? I mean, we all collect action figures as adults for a reason, and a big part of it is nostalgia, a sense of accomplishment, and it's fun. It's our hobby. We should enjoy our hobby. But with Star Wars 3 and 3/4 showing no sign of stopping, well, is this rabbit hole endless? Will there ever be a time when I have a complete collection, especially when characters get redone over and over again, a bit with better articulation? It's sort of, are you committed for the long haul or are you not? And while vintage lines have an ending point, and even some modern lines will hopefully have an ending point when you can get all the characters you want. Hello, Hasbro, I'm one feral short. This is a rabbit hole I enjoy going down. I like the fact that there's no end in sight. I have my lines that are complete, sealed, and done, and I have others that are much more like a never-ending story. And to me, that's a good thing because collecting brings joy and happiness, and as long as they'll keep making them, I'll keep buying them. I hope you enjoyed this video, and it's a good look at the different ways we collect and the different rabbit holes we kind of go into as we try to collect them all. Are there lines that you've been chasing for years, if not decades? Let me know. I'd love to hear in the comment section below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.